Some developing news out of Mexico. Today, the Mexican army says they killed a powerful cartel leader during an operation meant to capture him. The Defense Department says the leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel was wounded during that operation.
Picture a single military operation changing the security map of an entire country in less than 24 hours. On February 23, 2026, Mexican security forces killed one of the world's most wanted drug traffickers in a raid that immediately triggered chaos across western Mexico. Within hours, highways were blocked, vehicles burned, and cities issued stay-indoors warnings. Multiple major news outlets, including the Associated Press, The Guardian, and CBS News, report that Mexican military forces killed Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, leader of the Jalisco New Generation cartel, during an operation in Tapalpa, Jalisco. According to AP, he was wounded during the raid and died from those injuries while being transported. The United States had a $15 million reward for his capture, one of the highest bounties ever offered for a drug trafficker. CJNG, the organization he led, is widely regarded as one of Mexico's most powerful and violent cartels, heavily involved in trafficking fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine into the United States. But the story doesn't end with a successful raid. According to the Associated Press, the hours after saw immediate retaliation. Burning vehicles appeared across highways. Armed groups set up roadblocks that paralyzed entire regions. And in the most alarming detail, AP reporting describes 25 Mexican National Guard members killed in follow-on attacks linked to cartel retaliation. This isn't just regional news. It's a flashpoint involving U.S. intelligence, bilateral security cooperation, and the fentanyl crisis killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Before we go further, if this kind of fact-based reporting matters to you, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps this reach a wider audience. Now, let's keep going. To understand why this death matters, you need to understand who Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes was and what the organization he built became. El Mencho wasn't just another trafficker. According to Mexican and U.S. authorities, he was one of the most dangerous cartel leaders in modern history. The $15 million U.S. reward signaled. Washington viewed him as a direct national security threat tied to the fentanyl crisis. The Jalisco New Generation cartel rose to power with a reputation for extreme violence and rapid territorial expansion. CJNG became known for brazen attacks on Mexican security forces, military-grade weapons, and tactics that looked more like insurgency than traditional organized crime. Reports describe the cartel deploying armored vehicles, explosive drones, and coordinated assaults that forced entire regions into lockdown. But the real reason El Mencho became a priority wasn't just violence, it was the product. CJNG is heavily tied to fentanyl production and trafficking. Mexican cartels manufacture it in labs using precursor chemicals, then smuggle the finished product across the U.S. border in quantities small enough to avoid detection but potent enough to kill thousands. CJNG became extraordinarily good at it. U.S. drug enforcement officials have repeatedly described CJNG as one of the primary suppliers of fentanyl reaching American streets. Every shipment represented potential overdoses from California to Ohio. Every lab that stayed operational was a direct threat to American lives. El Mencho was reportedly a former police officer who co-founded CJNG after an earlier cartel collapsed. That background may explain how CJNG developed tactics that were unusually sophisticated and brutal. The cartel didn't just move drugs. It controlled territory, extorted businesses, recruited aggressively, and responded to any challenge with overwhelming force designed to send a message. Do not test us. That's the organization Mexican forces were dealing with when they launched the Tapalpa operation. Not a small-time smuggling ring, a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise with military-grade capabilities and a proven willingness to retaliate. When the raid succeeded and El Mencho died, it was the removal of a figure who had shaped cartel strategy and violence patterns across multiple countries for years. But removing that figure doesn't automatically mean removing the threat. Let's reconstruct what actually happened during the operation, sticking to what credible outlets and official statements confirm. Mexican authorities say the military operation took place in Tapalpa, Jalisco, a mountainous region south of Guadalajara. According to CBS News and the Associated Press, El Mencho was wounded during the raid and later died from those injuries. CBS News reported Mexico's defense ministry said Oseguera was wounded in Tapalpa and died while being transported by air. The key point: the fatal injury occurred during the operation itself. How did they find him? According to AP's follow-up reporting, Mexican special forces tracked Oseguera through a romantic partner. This suggests a targeted intelligence operation built over time. tracking relationships and movements until they had enough to strike. That precision explains why this is described as a major strategic victory. Mexican forces didn't stumble onto El Mencho, they hunted him systematically. And they had help. Multiple outlets, including AP and CBS, report the United States provided intelligence support. The White House publicly acknowledged this, confirming U.S. intelligence assistance was part of the mission. What does intelligence support mean? It can include signal intelligence, intercepting communications, tracking devices, human intelligence coordination, vetting sources, identifying trusted associates, analytic support profiling, likely hideouts, and security layers. None of that requires U.S. soldiers on Mexican soil, but it can be decisive when the target has stayed alive for years by limiting visibility and constantly changing locations. This detail is politically significant. For Mexico, emphasizing that Mexican forces executed the raid is crucial. Mexican leaders have resisted U.S. military action inside Mexico. For the United States, acknowledging intelligence support helps answer domestic pressure to do something about fentanyl without unilateral military action. And that pressure has been building. The fentanyl crisis has become urgent, with tens of thousands of overdose deaths annually. American lawmakers have called for more aggressive action, with some proposing designating cartels as terrorist organizations. When AP reports this killing delivers Mexico's biggest win yet under rising U.S. demands to confront cartels more aggressively, that's the context. This wasn't just about removing one man, it was demonstrating bilateral cooperation can produce results. But operations like this come with a cost. Within hours of El Mencho's death, Western Mexico erupted. Within hours of reports that El Mencho had been killed, Western Mexico experienced coordinated violence that looked like a cartel activating an emergency response. According to the Associated Press, burning vehicles and road blockades spread rapidly across Jalisco and neighboring states. Groups set cars and trucks on fire to block highways, choking off movement. These weren't just dramatic images. Roadblocks are calculated cartel tactics designed to slow military reinforcements, isolate areas, and spread fear fast. CBS News reported violence reached areas affecting tourism, including disruptions around Puerto Vallarta. The network described the response as a wave of unrest tied to CJNG's reaction, but the retaliation went beyond property damage. In separate AP reporting focused on the aftermath, the toll is described as severe. That report states 25 Mexican National Guard members were killed in follow-on attacks tied to backlash after the raid. If that holds through official confirmation, it would mark one of the deadliest bursts of cartel violence against state forces in recent memory. Think about what that represents. 25 trained soldiers killed not during the raid, but afterward in retaliatory strikes meant to punish the state. That's coordinated operational capacity. If CJNG can strike back hard enough to kill dozens of troops and trigger major disruptions across multiple states, then El Mencho's death doesn't automatically equal collapse. It suggests the organization still has command structure, personnel, weapons, and the ability to execute complex operations even after losing its top leader. Retaliatory blockades serve multiple purposes. They slow government response. They prevent reinforcements from reaching contested areas. They strand emergency services and trap civilians trying to flee. Psychologically, they message both government and public. We can still shut down your roads, cities, and daily life overnight. AP's reporting describes the aftermath as widespread, with major roads blocked and vehicles burned across multiple locations. Travel warnings were issued. Airlines adjusted schedules. Families sheltered in place. This is the civilian cost of cartel warfare, why taking out the leader isn't simple. Every operation has second-order effects. Every raid can trigger retaliation. In a country where cartels have military-grade weapons and thousands of operatives, retaliation can mean roadblocks, convoy attacks, checkpoint ambushes, and violence spreading across state lines within hours. The Mexican government now faces a critical window: push harder while CJNG is potentially destabilized, or pull back, hoping violence subsides as the cartel regroups. History suggests neither option is clean. Pushing harder can provoke more retaliation. Pulling back can signal weakness and invite rivals. The next few weeks are the danger zone not just for security forces, but for anyone living in or traveling through regions where CJNG operates. So where does this leave Mexico, the United States, and the millions of people living in regions where CJNG operates? Let's start with what we can say based on verified reporting and historical patterns. First, government response. Mexican authorities, including President Claudia Sheinbaum, have framed the operation as a major security victory and emphasized that Mexico strengthened its own capabilities to carry out the raid. That messaging matters domestically. especially because cooperation with the United States can be politically sensitive when it looks like foreign intervention rather than partnership. At the same time, U.S. officials publicly acknowledged providing intelligence support, a detail that helps Washington respond to domestic pressure to do more about fentanyl trafficking, while avoiding the appearance of unilateral military action inside Mexico. But the real question isn't about messaging. It's about what comes next for CJNG itself. When a cartel loses its top leader, history shows us two common paths, and neither one is peaceful. Path 1. Centralized succession. If CJNG has a clear second-in-command structure, leadership could consolidate relatively quickly. In that scenario, you'd see a spike in violence as the new leadership proves it's still in control, punishes the state for the raid, and reestablishes dominance over rivals. The immediate retaliation we've already seen, including the killing of 25 National Guard members, suggests CJNG retains coordination capacity right now. Path 2. Fragmentation. This is the darker possibility. The organization splinters into competing factions, each trying to control territory, labs, smuggling routes, and revenue streams. Violence rises not just from clashes with the state, but from former allies turning on each other. Mexico has seen this pattern before after high-profile arrests and killings, and the result is often more violence, not less, because splintered groups behave more unpredictably and fight more openly over smaller pieces of territory. There's also a third factor: rival cartels. CJNG has enemies. When leadership changes or weakens, rivals may see an opportunity to move into contested areas, take control of valuable smuggling corridors, or settle old scores. Even small shifts in territorial control can trigger deadly escalation. So, what should people watch for in the coming weeks? Security posture in Jalisco and surrounding states, whether roadblocks and attacks taper off or continue. Official statements about follow-up operations and whether Mexican forces push harder or adopt a more defensive stance. Signs of internal cartel conflict, increased violence in specific regions, reports of splinter groups, or shifts in trafficking patterns. Here's the bottom line. If confirmed as reported, this is a historic takedown, one of the most significant cartel leadership strikes in years. But it's also the beginning of a volatile transition period. Removing a kingpin can weaken command and control, disrupt operations, and create opportunities for law enforcement. It can also trigger exactly the kind of chaos we've seen in the first 24 hours: retaliation, roadblocks, and violence that spreads across state lines. The next few weeks will tell us which scenario is unfolding. And for civilians living in affected regions, that uncertainty is the hardest part, not knowing whether this marks the beginning of the cartel's decline or just the start of a more fractured, more violent chapter. If this kind of in-depth coverage is valuable to you, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment letting us know what you think. Should governments focus more on leadership strikes like this one? Or are there better strategies for reducing cartel violence? We want to hear from you, and your engagement helps us keep doing this kind of reporting. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll keep tracking this story as it develops.